Hodges. Welcome to Chattanooga Self Improvement Meetup, a mastermind group where we listen, learn, ask questions, and comment in an effort to help make each other the best version of ourselves, thus helping to make the world a better place in which to live. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Liane Brown. She's an author, and she's the author of Refugee. And I had already posted the program. I called it My Escape from Nazi Germany, but the official title of her program is From Fear to Freedom, and you'll understand in a few minutes. Thousands of stories have been told about the deprivation and horror of Second World War, but there is one aspect that has received comparatively little attention: the story of those who lost the same war twice, the people of Germany, not the military, the Nazis, or the government itself, but the villagers, the grandparents, the wives, and the children, the people who had little more control over their future than did the victims of the concentration camps. The Third Reich of Germany, in its corruption and deposition, subjected many of its own people to terrible abuse before it began to crumble, abandoning them to a new kind of Holocaust. Those who lived in the western part of the country had the hope, at least, of rebuilding lives for themselves after 1945. But those in the east who came under Russian control soon found that the struggles had only begun. In this book, Liane Guddat Brown recounts 16 months of her life as a young German girl under Russian corruption in an area that is now part of Poland. Those in her little family were the last representatives of a town of 20,000 residents. All others have been murdered, forced to flee, or starved to death. Despite brutal treatment and harsh conditions, the Guddats survived, escaped, and reunited their family, bringing with them to the free world a compelling story of God's marvelous grace. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce my new dear friend, Liane Brown. Thank you so much.
I like the historian because I'm history, almost, born eons ago. And I don't know how many of you have known somebody who has seen Hitler personally. Now you do. Liane Brown has seen him personally as he came through our hometown in East Prussia, his Valkyrie, and I'm sure some of you have seen that film Valkyrie. Was very close to where I was born and raised. And we'll do a little bit of history here. Hitler, the Führer, came into power what year?
33.
Thank you. You're a good historian. He built his first concentration camps in 1934. 1 year later. In order to show the world how wonderful Nazism was, he was able to present to the world the Berlin Olympics. That's how to get the world together and get to know you. Of course, political opposition was right there, which he did not care for at all, because he despised people whose brains were stuffed with knowledge. He was afraid of wolves. He was afraid of the dark. He was afraid of blood. And you put all this together, and what do you get? Also, in seances, he was called the savior of the world. The savior of the world. But he didn't want anyone to know that he was going to seances. So what did he do with those who went to cultic meetings. He threw them in some of these concentration camps. What did he do with those who did not care for his politics? He threw them into concentration camps, especially the preachers. 713 preachers were jailed right in the beginning of his reign. And Führer means leader. Führer is the German word for leader. Our lives were wonderful in East Prussia. And East Prussia, I don't see how all of you can see my map here. Part of an antenna my hubby put up for me. This is East Prussia, Berlin, Lithuania, about which I will be speaking most of the time, West Germany. East Prussia went all the way up here at that time from Lithuania, bordered by Ukraine and Russia. And later on, as some of you historians know, that a lot of that was annexed to Russia until even recently. So our lives here in East Prussia, Innsbruck, were wonderful. My dad was a businessman, had a large leather goods store with 7 employees. Life was absolutely beautiful. In the summer, we went to the Baltic Sea, played in the ocean. My grandparents' farm was right up here, which I visited last year. Life was wonderful until one day a Nazi came into my dad's store and said, "Hitler's army needs you. Report in an hour and a half to the next town." That took my dad away from us, except for 2 visits. One when his dad died for 7.5 years. Thank you, Nina. With Hitler being so intent on working himself into the saviorship of the world, of course, he needed land. He needed other countries to build his reign, 1,000-year reign. He was a choir boy, so he knew a little bit about the Bible, apparently, and the 1,000-year reign that talks about Jesus, who was going to reign someday for 1,000 years, but he made himself that leader and started marching into Poland, took over Poland, marched into Czechoslovakia. And in East Prussia were 2.6 million people. And suddenly the world awakened. Finally, you all awakened. Your parents awakened. What took you so long? Bombs started falling on us. What had we done? Nothing. My mom would rush into the bomb shelter with us night after night. Town of 50,000 people. No big businesses or factories there. Why were we bombed? By the British and by the Russians. Night after night, we had to rush into the bomb shelter. The town was being destroyed. My mom's friend from out of town, the young preacher's wife, came one day and she said, "Are you okay? I see the burning city. You have to get out of here. You can't live here much longer. How can you?" My mom said, "But where are we going to go?" With 4 children, I being the oldest one, 10 years old. Oh, I did love Hitler. I was in the Hitler Youth. I marched for him. I sang for him. I greeted him. I was all for Hitler. You know why? Because we were brainwashed. Oh, he was our fearless leader. He would really make his 1,000-year reign, and we would be included at us. We had to stretch our muscles. We had to march. We had to sing. And we did that joyfully because we didn't know better. We followed him. But when the bombs fell, something somehow changed. So my mom's friend said, "Well, You know, my dad lives not too far from Berlin. His wife died, so we are here. And I'm going to write to my dad in Lapena that you're coming. And I'm going to write to him and tell him that I'm going to be coming later too, once I get permission. My mom said, but I can't leave my mother-in-law here alone in this burning city. She said, well, take her along, take her along. My mom got permission in the darkness of the night. Our train pulled out of Mstermind. Beautiful city with parks, man-made lakes. Beautiful, beautiful. Never to see it again. On a rainy day, we knocked on the door in Lapena of this elderly gentleman, a lay preacher. Everybody wet, bedraggled. I being the oldest one, my brother 7, my youngest, my sister 4 years old, my youngest brother not even 1 year old yet. Mr. Lehman, my mom said, may we come in? Your daughter has told you that you will come. My daughter? Is my daughter all right? Is she all right? Yes, she's all right. But come on in. Come out of the rain. Now, if somebody would knock on our door today, through how many peepholes and how many latches and how many locks would we look and check people out to see if they are worthy of coming into our home? This gentleman said, come on in. He didn't know us. He's never seen us. All we had was the clothes we wore and a couple little bundles. How much can a mother carry when the baby carriage made during wartime lost the wheels from the railroad station to his little farmhouse? He said, come on in. We were welcomed then. His daughter and 2 little ones came later. Life was so peaceful. It was unbelievable. There were no bombs falling. From August 1944, September, October, November, December, on beautiful sunny days, this group of Christians would take their boats and row around the lakes, which almost surrounded this little town of Lapena. Life was beautiful. But in January, my brother and I started to go to school. And in January, refugees started coming into town. Refugees? What are refugees doing here in this area? Well, the Russians are no, that can't be. We're safe. We're so close to Berlin. We're in the central part of Germany. The Russians are behind us. Please let us come into your town. Yeah, where are we going to put you? We don't want you here. Where are we going to put you? The last day of school arrived. I sat in the very last bench in the room. When the teacher came in, we had to jump up and say, "Heil Hitler!" For some reason, I don't know to this day, I did not jump up. I did not greet Hitler. The teacher called me forward in front of 40 kids and slapped my face so hard that his fingers were seen for 3 days on my face. That was my last day of school under the Hitler regime. The refugees were put up in the school. More refugees coming. The Russians are behind us. The Russians are behind us. Well, my mom said, I'm going to go to Nazi headquarters and find out what happened. She went to Nazi headquarters. Nonchalantly, this gentleman sat behind his desk. My dear Mrs. Guddat, you are the wife of a brave German soldier. Surely you know that your government has made plans to take mothers and children to safety. Don't worry about it. Just go to the railroad station. There will be trains to taking you to safety. Should anything ever happen to this town, even though the cobblestones were beginning to vibrate, it sounded like thunder, but it wasn't thunder. Tanks were rolling. My mom came back home, 12 o'clock noon from headquarters. At 4 o'clock, like wildfire, evacuate the city, the Russians are coming. Okay, my mom put the 2 little ones on the sled, snow about 4 inches deep, January 31st of 1945. Going to the first street corner, my mom said to a neighbor, "You're going in the wrong direction. The railroad station is to the left. You're going to the right." There are no trains. No trains? But the Nazi official just told me there would be The Nazis took off with those trains. We found out much later, and the train was bombed. We went back to the little farmhouse with the lay pastor, our family, the young preacher's wife with her 2 little sons. My grandmother was there. And in those days, everybody had made arrangements. Should our family ever get split up, we're going to meet at such and such a place. And the choir leader from our church in East Prussia, he had decided that should anything happen, we would meet right there in Lavena, in that little place. And we would meet one another there. He had hoped to meet his wife there, his 2 daughters, invalid from the First World War. He said, that rumbling, that is war. That's not thunder and lightning. Germany doesn't have thunder and lightning in the winter. That is war. It's running closer and closer. Everybody huddled together in the little living room. Sounded louder and louder. Shots ringing out in the streets. Neighbors knocking on the door. Mr. Lehman, may we come in? My children and I are afraid. Come on in. Barely were they settled. Another knock on the front door. Mr. Lehman, please let us in. We are afraid. Please let us in. What? You always called me the just one. You always called me the righteous one. Do you want to come into my house? He could have said. He didn't. He said, come on in. Come on in. 25 people settled together in the living room, waiting for love. Waiting for war. Oh, yes. Flags of surrender had to be hung out of the windows. Sheets were ripped up. We're surrendering, surrendering. Have any idea of what surrender means? Surrender to an enemy? We surrendered. We sat. Teach us to pray, they were saying in the room. Teach us to pray. We don't know how to pray. Well, did you not have good times in which you could have learned to pray? You want to learn to pray now? The preacher will take the Bible and read from Psalm 91. He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my strength. My God, in Him will I trust. Surely He shall deliver thee from the snare of the fowler and from the noisome pestilence. He shall cover thee with His feathers, under His wings shalt thou trust. Thou shalt not be afraid for the terror by day, nor for by night, nor for the arrow that flieth by day. And he would read, and more shots ringing out in the street. And my mom had the 4 of us in that tiny little farmhouse living room, sitting on the corner of the couch, and she prayed, and I have forgotten every single prayer she ever prayed except for this one. Lord Jesus, take all of us. Don't let one of my children remain behind. Remain behind? Was she saying that there's a chance that I might die? I couldn't fathom it. Suddenly the front door was almost pulled in. Russians came into the room. Soldiers, 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 pointing their rifles. We're soldiers. No soldiers here. Only women and children. Everybody crying. No soldiers here. They raced out. They ran into the courtyard. Another group came in. Soldiers, no soldiers. Watches, watches. Me a watch. Next to me stood a Russian soldier. Watches all the way up his arm. He had already confiscated from others. They wanted more watches. We didn't have watches. The next command was, woman, come. Woman, come. Children crying, women crying. Shots ringing out in the street. Soldiers' attention was diverted from the women to what was going on outside. As they were gone, we went to the kitchen stove, took some ashes. Nobody wanted to look beautiful for the rapist. Nobody looked beautiful for the rapist. It was decided that the women, when the Russians ran into the long hallway and through the kitchen into the living room, would go into the bedroom. My brother and I had to lift up the carpet, open the little trap door, and the ladies would all slide down in there for safety. Do you know why? Because Stalin had given the command to misuse every German female. Age did not matter. I managed to outrun a Russian at one time. Age did not matter. One time, we heard them running in. The ladies tried to dash down into the basement. We couldn't get the rug up fast enough. They came, they looked in there with their rifles. Spies, spies, you old spies down there. No, they're not spies, the young preacher's wife said. She couldn't get in there either. She couldn't get in there fast enough. They're afraid, they're afraid. God protected. Everybody who knew how to pray, prayed. My mom continued to pray. How could anybody have faith at that time? How could anybody pray? Would Jesus take all of us? You know, when my mom was a teenager, she decided that going to church, being a good person, and helping others was not all there was to life. That God had a son whom he sent to die for you and for me, who went to the cross, who rose again, what she had to do and what she did as a teenager. She asked this Lord Jesus into her heart and life and asked him to let her live for him from that day forth, which she did. That's why she had the faith. Food became scarce with so many people in the room, Russians running in and out day and night. My brother and I were on the job of finding food. We went to stores. The shelves were empty, the doors were open, the windows broken in. Turmoil in this town, nothing but turmoil. Food? There was no food. But we saw Russian soldiers, my brother and I, eating. Let's go and ask for some food. We didn't know at the time what it meant in Russian. Klebanata, please. That means, please give me some bread. Every now and then, my brother, who looked like his hair was like a dandelion, he went poof, and they liked him. Every now and then he got a piece of bread. One time even a pig's head, and we brought it home. We went to abandoned farms, my brother and I, dug through old potato bins, brought home mushy potatoes. We used them to eat. When the school was evacuated, all the people, the refugees, chased out, including my grandmother, chased out of our home. And my mom's sister-in-law, they all had to leave. Where did they go? We had no clue. Only those who originally lived in that house could stay. Almost everybody was gone. Where were they going? We had no idea. One day, a group came in and said, we need the downstairs, Russians, officers, we need the downstairs. You all move upstairs. That night, we heard heavy steps coming upstairs where all of us were squished in one tiny little room. Russian came in. Flashlights. Good woman? No, too skinny. Good woman? I was sleeping on the couch with my aunt and my little brother. He kicked me onto the floor. And he took advantage of my sweet aunt. He shot into the ceiling 21 times. This went on, day after day. Finally, they evacuated the bottom of the house and we could go back in there. Food was even more scarce. On our begging trip, my brother and I found out that the butcher's wife had hung her children in the smoke chamber and committed suicide. Another mom tied bricks around the kids' necks and committed suicide. Why? And here, my mom and with her kids were alive, and her friend, and her two little ones, and we were all safe because they had a higher connection. They knew about God. They could pray to Him. On our begging trips, we crossed cemeteries. The tombstones were open, the graves were open. Well, what were the soldiers looking for? Watches, gold, silver, teeth, whatever. Devastation everywhere. Not safe for the mothers to go outside, of course. That's why my mom and always sent my brother and me out to scrounge for some food. The Russian hospital ended up in the school building after they were evacuated. My brother and I went through the garbage and found bloody crusts. We brought them home. My mom washed them. She prayed, made bread soup. We ate it. Yes, we did all that, ate all that journey. Stopped. Our bellies began to protrude. Boils set in on the body. This was still wartime. But one day when our house had to be evacuated and we had to find another place to live, we were given a tiny, tiny little room. Upstairs, we had to crawl into this little room. We called it Noah's Ark. We were there for 4 months. My mom's job was to hold my brother's mouth shut because he was always crying from starvation. No milk, no food, nothing. My mom was praying. Everybody who knew how to pray, prayed. After 4 months, during the 4 months, in the courtyard, we always heard women scream, scream, scream. One day, however, there were jubilant Russians. Germany kaputt, Germany kaputt, Germany kaputt. We in our little ark, we had no idea what that meant. We didn't know until some time later that the war had ended. Hitler had capitulated. We had no idea where our famous leader was. We had no idea what was going on. Well, why? Why did you not phone anybody or listen to your radios? Anything of value had been taken from us. We had no idea what was going on in the rest of the world. Would life change for us after the war had ended? Not one bit. Russians going in, out, taking, misusing, shooting people, killing people. That's what Stalin had said. You misuse them. I'm going to read you something from this book, Menaces at Potsdam. Kill. Nothing in Germany is guiltless, neither the living nor the yet unborn. This was the command of Stalin's, written by one of his famous authors. Follow the words of Comrade Stalin and crush forever the fascist beast in its den. Break the racial pride of German woman. Take her as your legitimate booty. Kill, you brave soldiers of the victorious Soviet army. Kill. Do you think they obeyed? They did obey. My mom had started sewing for the Russians. In the meantime, the so-called evacuations were beginning. Russia was trying to claim this part of Germany for itself. What did they do? Make friends with the Polish people. The Polish people didn't like them either. Chased all the Germans out of town and brought the Polish people in to claim the land for Russia. Did the West do anything about it? No. My mom was sewing, and she was not allowed to leave, including the invalid from the First World War with his prosthesis. He was a tailor. We were the last group in that little town. We couldn't leave. The tailor found out in the Polish tailor shop that there were trains going to Berlin. Well, he said, go to Berlin, Emmy, you find out where your husband is, and find out where the young preacher's wife's husband is, and where all of my kids are, my 2 daughters and my wife, and come back. But when she came back from Berlin, we had already heard that anybody, now these are peace times, okay? We already heard that anybody who dared to have gone to Berlin would be thrown into a Russian jail. So it was decided that my brother and I would go to the railroad station, and as the train stopped and the throng would go through the main gate, the people, invalid and the young preacher's wife decided we were supposed to go the outside of the building and whisk my mom away so she wouldn't be taken captive. Well, 2 soldiers saw us, put the rifle butts in her back, woman come, woman come. We went behind her, they were trying to chase us away. My mom turned around, but it is my daughter's, was my 12th birthday. They pushed her ahead, pushed her into a Russian jail. They threw her down into a dungeon, dark dungeon, wintertime, January, no windows, cold. She listened. Oh, I'm not the only one here. She found out there were Polish people there, other people. She started singing. She started talking to them. She didn't understand if they understood her or anything. She tried to uplift everybody. At night she had to go out and saw firewood, saw trees and logs for the Russians. Later on she had to go and clean their bathrooms. They didn't know that you sit on them. You usually stand with bare hands. She had to clean all of that up. She was trying to get some snow to make the job easier. She was not allowed to go out and get snow. Folks, those were the days of peace for the Germans. Well, what happened to all the other Germans from East Prussia, the 2.6 million? About 1 million women were shipped to Siberia. What happened to the children? The old grandparents died from starvation. The children died. Some of them made it, however, to this day, and there are books written about the wolf children. Have you ever heard of the wolf children? They were left in the middle of winter with little siblings just dying because they had nothing to eat. There was no food. What happened to the other East Prussians? Well, Hitler had in place Mr. Koch. He was in charge of all of East Prussia, and with the Russian border so close, and after the first group of Russians had already broken into the town of Nemesburg, raped all the women, nailed them naked to barn doors, everybody knew what was coming. They started packing their wagons and horses and buggies to leave, go west, go west, go west. Hitler said, no, that means we are showing that we are afraid of the Russians. You cannot let them go. If you see anybody pack, you shoot them. That's how we were treated. We know what Hitler did to the Jewish people. Horrible, horrible, horrible. We knew who did it. The SS. Oh, we knew that much later. We didn't really know in the very East what was going on in the West, in Munich and so on, what Hitler did. We didn't know. So Koch decided nobody is supposed to leave. Hitler has said, no, nobody leaves. They were trying to get to the harbor, the Baltic Sea, over here to the west, to Denmark. As they came to the harbor and had to cross a peninsula, the Russian bombers saw this strip of moving people, bombed them. They broke in. They broke in. This little area there is filled with bodies. East German people. Some of them made it to the ships, including one of my aunts made it to the Gustloff. Gustloff, one of the largest ships, 9,000 people. It sank. 949 were rescued. My aunt was one of them. She had a broken skull, completely broken zigzag skull. She went around the rest of her life. What happened to the rest of us? We had no idea for several years what happened. My grandma, my sweet grandma, 78 years old, with whom we went to this little farmhouse, she was gang raped to death in a room filled with people. My great-grandfather, age 93, was found shot in a snowbank. My grandfather died somehow while fleeing his farm. My dad's twin brother, they found only body parts of him. He was defending a city in East Prussia. My grandma was alive but died years later, we found out, in then Lithuania. This is just one family story. I asked my cousin, whom I met in Lithuania last year. It was a very unique meeting. We had no idea. He lives in Germany. Didn't know that he was in Lithuania. He didn't know that I was there because our son and daughter-in-law are interested in family history. So we were there. I said, Gerhard, tell me, how did you get out of East Prussia in 1945? He was one of those who were in that ribbon that was bombed across the ice with his mom and his sister and an aunt. And he said, when I saw the horses, the buggies, and even buses just crashing into this ice, he was 11 years old. He said, I became spiritually aware. And I had asked God into my heart and life, because that's when I saw how horrible war is, to this day in this country, I have been called a Jew killer. Folks, I'm not. I'm from Stuart, Florida. Moved up here a short time ago and was invited to a group, to a breakfast group of Jewish ladies in Pompano Beach. About 35, 40 ladies there. I told my story as I related it to you. And one lady, after I was finished, said, "I hate Germans. I hate Germans." I said, "I'm sorry you hate Germans." "No, not you, Germans." And you know, how many of you, let me ask you this, then you can ask me if we have the time, questions later. How many of you have heard a story of what happened to the rest of the Germans before? How many? Very few. Very few. Do you know why? Because we're called Jew killers. We have nothing to say. What would we say to the world? What can we say to the world? When your own leader committed such crime, there is nothing we can say. Therefore, we don't say. And thank you for letting me be here and telling my story. And I don't know if you have time for questions or anything.
We do. Do you understand why when I heard Liane speak only about 3 or 4 weeks ago, that I said, she's got to come tell that story to Chattanooga Self Improvement Meetup? What an inspiration. Something to think about. You know, America's in trouble. I'm not going to get into politics, but I ask that you carefully analyze candidates and what they really stand for. America could find itself in the same situation Germany's in if we're not very careful. Liane, let's give her a big round of applause. We've had some great speakers here. We'll have other great speakers, but I propose that you will never forget October the 15th, 2019, when you heard Liane Brown tell her story. She told the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say. So we've got time. If any of you would like to ask Liane questions. Yes, Sylvia?
Yes. Well, I'm curious about how the rest of your family got out of the village. Maybe you told that, but I didn't hear it.
No, that's part 2.
Oh, okay.
Literally, it's quite a long story. We finally escaped from the area and came to the West. And when coming to the West, yes, the West Germans had been bombed, but they had not gone through the trials we went through under enemy occupation. They did not understand us. They did not like us because we had nothing. We got to the West with only the clothes on our backs. I wore 2 dresses. So we were the scum of the earth, whereas they had everything. In a class of 50 girls, there was only one other one, and I from the eastern part of Germany. We could never laugh. We had seen the horrors of war and what it can do. The others were dressed in nice, beautiful clothing. I wore the same dress day in, day out to school. The invalid's daughter, who helped us get to West Germany, to the British zone, she had acquired an army blanket. She gave it to my mom as we were bumming around in refugee camps for years yet in the West, and did not even know for the longest time where my dad was. He was a prisoner of war in Africa. Was not a Nazi. My parents were not Nazis. And gave my mom this army blanket to sew a coat for me. The coat was of a brown color. I wore that year in, year out, and I said, I never want to have anything to do with the color brown. Came to America, in church, there was a Mr. Brown who had his eye on me and still does. And on Saturday, we're celebrating 62 years of our Any other questions?
So if I were to see you in a restaurant, you obviously are a very beautiful woman, and I would look at you and think, oh, she's had a very nice, easy life. That would be my impression of you. You have a lightness about you and that kind of thing. You've endured more trauma than most people in this world. How do you do that? How do you keep your mind in a good place and go on and be
It's
okay?
only God who keeps me focused.
Okay, so you focus on that.
Yes, and as a teenager in a tent meeting in Germany, I also gave my heart to Christ. When the evangelist came to town and built an imaginary wall, I was 14 years old then, a black wall. God was on one side, I was on the other side. I wanted to be on God's side. And in order to get to God's side, I had to invite his son, Jesus Christ, into my heart and life and confess my sins. That's what I did. And that's what keeps me now. I have had numerous friends, and I see why you asked that question, especially in your profession. They were constantly on psychiatrist couches and medication and so on, and couldn't get over what happened. And I know it's only God that has happened.
Thank you.
Jordan,
Thank you.
as a recent graduate, did they teach this stuff in school?
What stuff?
What you learned today?
No.
Okay.
Are you glad you came today?
Yes, absolutely.
What's your biggest takeaway?
Well, I like history, but I learn it every day that the more and more I'm alive, how much information there is out there and how little I really know. I don't know. It's a pleasure to hear you talk, Liane, and to know that you kept God in your heart, and to know that He was the thing that kept you going for so long. I mean, it's like Pam said, how you have a lightness in your heart. That's something characteristic of someone who has something that they can really hold on to when times are tough. And so I'm very thankful for you coming here.
You know, this is the first time I have heard a similar story told at a time that I could really comprehend it. And the closest thing I can remember to it was when I took Spanish when I was in high school a couple of years ago. My Spanish teacher was from Cuba. She was from a very prominent family in Cuba. Her husband was a medical doctor. They had a beautiful home. But prior to them escaping, Castro had moved them out of their home, and they were living in the guest house, and Castro's soldiers were living in their house. They came to America with the clothes on their back, just like Liane did. We've got so much to be thankful for. Don't ever take this freedom for granted.
My
Exactly.
husband was one of those children.
What?
He was a Peter Pan child. So
Could you share a little with us?
He came in 1962 as a Peter Pan child. He was 10 years old, and he came with his older brother, and they put him in Miami in a camp for children. And then he was moved to Michigan, and he lived in Michigan in an orphanage for a year. And then through the Catholic Church, basically, they were allowed to apply for a visa for his parents to come. So his parents came a year later. But he was one of the lucky ones, because not all the children were reunited with their parents. Some kids came and they never got to see their parents again. And so I've got two beautiful children that are half Hispanic and half me. And, the United States had something to do with that.
Oh, yes. You said United States. If any of you, maybe you, I don't know your age, but maybe your dad Some of you sent care packages to Germany to keep us alive after the war in the refugee camp. We got soup, a can of soup. The soup tasted funny to us because it had these orange pieces in it. We didn't know what that was. Any idea what that might have been? No. Sweet potatoes. And then we were given this yellow bread that tasted so sweet. We didn't know what that was, as we were in a refugee camp in Berlin, 400 people to one room. We had no clue. Cornbread. But thank you, folks, and thank those who are above you, a generation above you, who've done that to keep us alive. That's something about us Americans. We stand up for what's right, and we have to do the worst sometimes. But then we turn around and help, help, help. How many times have we heard it, that America is the only country that helped this nation or that nation? How many times?
Many.
Many times. As leader. Worse than Cuba almost right now. The people are dying and leaving and everything. Yes, sir?
Amazed in a way that you don't have any hatred in the heart with all of the suffering and the things you have seen. And even with Christ, I would think sometimes it's still difficult. You can't eradicate those things from your mind and memories. Is it all due to religion that
Yes, definitely.
keeps you in that?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's that strong and that significant. I guess is what I'm really trying to question. I'm questioning you in that sense of it, but trying to understand it because most minds can't tolerate that. They can't accept all of the things that you have seen and felt and heard and so forth.
Yeah, seeing bodies floating in the lake, as my brother and I did on our baking trips to abandoned farms. Awful memories, but God can take care of that too.
You know,
You have a
Joe,
beautiful smile, by the way.
Thank you.
can you see why I just fell in love with her when I heard her speak? And the acoustics were terrible where we were, and I could pick up only about every 2 or 3 words, but she touched my heart. I saw a hand over here. Joe.
You know, it's just, you're such a perfect example of how bitterness and everybody's experienced in our life, in our generation, little bits of the opportunity to be bitter. And what she's forgiven puts us to shame in our little things that we have problems processing with our forgiveness. Perfect example of bitter turned so sweet.
Thank you, God.
Yeah, no, Joe, I'll be with you just a second, Maurice. You made me think of something. How were you able to forgive? And for those of you that were at Live to Lead Chattanooga last Friday, Marcus Buchanan had shared a few things, and in talking with John Maxwell, he was talking about needing to forgive people. And he said, I find it hard to believe. John said, you know, it isn't about them. The forgiveness is for you.
Right.
As some have said, anger and animosity held within is like acid in a tin bucket. That I real very, very pleased to be a part of. But I was very angry, and little by little, I've been able to, shall we say, forgive for myself, not them. Maurice?
Getting this publicity machine was second to nothing. And a crystal night of the whole lead up in terms of what happened there, going after intellectuals and what have you. But to take advantage or to sense what are the deep-seated hatreds that people have for other people, and how can he manipulate that and come out as the savior. And to watch how that was done, and to look at, even today, how publicity and what have you can be used for those purposes, you've seen the growth of this.
That's true. That's true. We call it brainwashing. And if you hear the same thing every day, you start to believe it. And if you know your neighbor feels the same way you do, you start to believe it. Yeah.
Well, he wasn't planning on Jesse Owens at the Olympics, though, was he?
No.
He was planning for his 1,000-year reign, folks.
Yeah.
And listen, where did he end up?
Yeah.
A chicken in some bunker.
Oh, you mean
Literally.
Not like a draft dodger, right?
Allow me to reinforce something.
Okay.
The slippery slope. The truth is, if someone had assassinated Hitler before 1941, there'd be statues of him all over Europe.
Mm-hmm.
Because he made a big change in the country. Most people didn't see what was coming. It was an insidious thing. Every country, ours included, stands prey to that. If we're not careful, we will follow the wrong person.
Exactly.
And all the stuff that's going on politically in our country right now, you begin to realize that because they use the term shadow government,
Mm-hmm.
people don't really realize in governments how insidious it is, not just with the leader. The leader sets the tone, but how the place is run. And I would think my experience, I spent some time in Germany in the military, so back in the 50s. And the country was still torn all to pieces even then. And people want to collectively blame all Germans. I know that's not true. And yet I know that, just like you said, you were in the Hitler Youth. If you were of a certain age, you probably were in that group because you pretty much could not be. If you weren't, you were going to be isolated and cut out of everything. We have a little bit of that here. And so I encourage everybody to pay attention to the slippery slope. That's all.
I will share a story. One time in the past, I had a German wife. Had a person I became acquainted with who was a young, intelligent physician from Belgium. Refused to have anything to do with my life. Even superficially. And I understood then the hatred that had occurred, but didn't have the real depth, but I could see outwardly what it had manifested in him. And my request to him at the time was something very superficial in a way. And he made no bones about it. He didn't want to have anything to do with it. But she was German. And interestingly, because she got some questions about this, and this was a number of years ago, she just didn't have anything to say. Fortunately, her father was put in charge of some horses. So he was a horse person, and so they used his talent, and he was anti-Nazi, but he was away from a lot of the issues and problems and so forth. So they saw it perhaps not firsthand, but in a different kind of a sense. But inevitably, there was nothing she could say. And even when she was around some of the other Germans, the topic came up, just quiet. They just had no answer. And ashamed to even try to answer. And it was something that I felt and saw for a long time.
One lady called me as my first book was published in upstate New York. We lived at the time, and she said, Liane, German lady, please, what shall I do? What shall I do? She had gorgeous flower beds in front of her home. Germans love flowers.
Yeah.
And her neighbor took the largest tree and felled it right across all the flower beds and called her German pig, German pig. That's today. I was called to my face. Told to my face, I'm glad you had to suffer too. Do we realize that when there is a wicked leader, he has only a certain group of people around him? In Germany, only 10% are Nazis, okay? So you can't call me a Nazi. You can't call my folks Nazis. In Russia, only 10% are communists. So you can't say all of them are communists, all of them love Putin. You can't say that. We have to know a little bit more about the country before we rake everybody with the same rake.
I think it's really important for us to realize that because, I have a lot of, being from Chattanooga, being from the South, I have a lot of conservatively, politically conservative friends, and a lot of them just kind of, they don't really think about what it is that they agree to, but they have these preconceptions about people from other countries. And I've always thought that's kind of dangerous because it's like you said, not everybody in Russia is communist, but it's easy for us to joke around and say, oh, they're all communists. And that's not true. And when we get into that kind of mindset, we're going down a similar path, down a slippery slope, if you want to call it, to where we're thinking other people are a certain way, and if we all have that mindset, that's kind of a dangerous thing for America. So I think it's really important that we consider that.
Let me ask you a question. How many of you are glad you came today? How many of you feel like this message needs to get out to more people?
It's called unintentional bias, and it's based on just generic information you're fed until you don't even realize that it's not true.
Yeah.
And it's real popular in human resources right now to study unintentional bias because we all have ingrained things from our families, our communities, wherever we're from, any groups we're affiliated with, religiously, whatever. But we get these mindsets about people because the human mind wants to put everything in a little box.
Yes.
Because that's how we rationalize everything.
So we got two messages here. We've got unconscious bias, and then I think we've got history that is being left out of the history books. I was appalled talking with someone recently about what's in the history books.
There's nothing more dangerous.
And we've got some that are just basically taking it upon themselves to write history what they want to be remembered. And
Well, I'm a historian myself. And the thing about history, if you study it enough, it's a gray. There's no black and white.
yeah,
There's exceptions, there's blends, there's nothing that's, you can say definite, especially when you get into the details of it. I use some examples. I used to work at Kennesaw Mountain. I spoke about Civil War history all the time. I've done programs here in Chattanooga.
we got 2 minutes.
And I mean, here's one. How many people know that Karl Marx, who wrote the Communist Manifesto, used to write letters back and forth with Abraham Lincoln? They were involved together, particularly through the New York Tribune newspaper with Horace Greeley. Karl Marx worked for that newspaper for 12 years. And he helped Lincoln get elected. Now, that's just one of those odd situations. You don't think of the fact that a term like communism that seems to be more of a modern term does actually involve that far back. And that actually German communists who had a revolution in 1848, 49, had to leave the country and came over here, joined regiments in the Union Army, and actually came through Rossville. And when they attacked up Missionary Ridge over there, whole regiments could not speak English. They had to get English and German-speaking officers to work with these people, and they had all come from Germany because of the failed communist revolution. So you can literally say there was communist troops that came up through Rossville and down the ridge where my house is. It's these kind of things, what I'm saying, there's so much more to history that when you only teach one side of it, your mind does not have the vocabulary to ask the question. You have to question everything. So there's never a time when you can lose by asking a question and questioning yourself, questioning anything else. Because you either find out you're right or you find out you're wrong and you can change. You can never lose by questions. But there's always more to the story.
You might find out you're right and wrong at the same time.
Liane has a brief.
One quick comment in regard to forgiveness. My mom was sewing and going to craft shows with her fairs in Florida, Boca Raton. She did that for years, and she was always busy, and my dad finally said, well, Emmy, you don't have, or Ushi, he called her, Ushi, you don't have to work so hard. She said, I have finally forgiven the Russians. You know what she did with that money? She bought Bibles and sent them to Russia. That's true forgiveness.
Wow.
True forgiveness.
Two things. Liane has copies of her book here. How much is it?
$15.
$15, and your new book will be out when?
Well, we have the sequel to this one.
Oh, you already have it?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So it's for sale. So this is 15, and the
other
sequel
one,
is?
both for 28.
Pardon?
Both of them for 28.
Okay. So if any of you want that, and do you use this to support your organization?
Yes.
And the name of the organization again is?
Desperate Dependent Community.
Mhm. Okay.
On Lee Highway.
So
It's a counseling center where our son-in-law and daughter counsel. So this is the sequel.
Liane will be here for a few moments. Our meeting it's 9:30. We always end it promptly. Any of you that don't know me would like to know how to contact me. Here are my cards. I have decided today I'm going to get this message out to as many people as I can. So I'm going to form some kind of a venue where she will present this story to a large number of people. So anyone that's committed to that likes my idea, will let me know. And together, we've got a lot of minds in here. We can get this message out. America needs to know it. They need to learn it. Thank you so much, Liane. I can't say how much
Thank you. You're such a diverse group and your minds are all just there. It's wonderful. Thank you for your kind attention. And this is my little flyer, which I wrote recently. My mom, my dad, my brother, and I. There was no room. This is a little farmhouse in which the whole story took place that I talked to you about.
And if you'll go into Chattanooga Self Improvement Meetup, you can just Google it. You don't have to even go to meetup.com. Just go to Chattanooga Self Improvement Meetup. If you're not in the group, all you've got to do, you can answer the questions so that I will immediately put you in the group. That way you'll get our emails and get the announcements. Chattanooga Self Improvement Meetup. If you have any problem getting into it, let me know. But I don't put people in the group until they attend one time. Again, we've run over. I apologize. We'll be around for a few moments. Anybody that has questions. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for our cups of good from Ian Goodman at Goodman Coffee Roasters. And remember, folks, your day will be just as good as you visualize it. We're out of here. Goodbye, Lisa.